Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. If you're currently growing roses in containers, or maybe you're thinking of adding a few potted roses to your patio or balcony, this is the episode for you. We get the tips from a professional rose grower, Ben Hanna. He's the owner of heirloomroses.com. Also, Master Rosarian Debbie Arrington solves some tree rose woes for a listener. And I chat with a local garden club about the need to keep an eye on soil temperatures in container plants during the summer with tips for cooling them off. It's all in today's episode number 276, Container Rose Growing Basics. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon Jungle in Suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, and we're brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. So I bought a rose recently. Let me tell you the story of the rose and why I bought it. I'm going to go back to 1980, to the night before my wedding. And we had the wedding dinner the night before, as is traditional with most weddings. And my mother was there, my late mother was there, who could be sometimes difficult to work with, to say the least. And she said after the dinner, I want a Cecil Bruner rose to wear. And we looked around at each other and go, oh, man, here we go. 12 hours from the wedding and you want a Cecil Bruner rose. So my wife, thinking quickly, gathered her bridal party together and said, you have a job tomorrow morning. Go find a Cecil Bruner rose. Well, they did. And she had one, so she was very happy because it reminded her of growing up on the farm in North Dakota way back when. So we all lived happily ever after. So for whatever reason, I decided to get and I will pronounce it correctly now, Cecile Brunet rose for my own garden, just to remember that hectic night many, many years ago. And so, okay, where do you go shopping for an heirloom rose? So, you do a search on the internet and what pops up but heirloomroses.com. And Cecile Brunet is a very old rose. It goes back to 1880 and does well in a wide variety of climates. Obviously, if it can grow on a farm in North Dakota, it can grow just about anywhere. So I was looking forward to probably having a bulletproof rose. We'll see about that. So I ordered from heirloomroses.com and it arrived when they said it was going to arrive. What shocked me, though, was when I opened the box and looked at the plant, it was kind of skinny and it didn't have any leaves. But it turns out there's a very good reason for that. And they're also grown on their own root system. And we'll get into that a little bit later, too. We're talking with Ben Hanna. He is the president, heirloomroses.com, up in Oregon, in St. Paul, Oregon. Ben, tell us about your love of roses. How the heck did you ever get in the rose business?
Yeah, my wife and I have always loved to garden. Plants have always been a big passion of ours. We've always grown roses. I grew up on a farm and growing roses, and my mom taught me all about roses and planting roses and things. But really about 10 years ago, I left corporate America and was looking for a lifestyle change that would keep me home closer to my family, and I was traveling all the time. And so my wife and I acquired heirloom roses from the founders 10 years ago, Louise Clements. It was just a passion of ours. It's online retail and farming together. So it was a great mix, good fit for me and my wife. And it's been a lot of fun owning the business and being around a great team of people that love roses.
I noticed that in your biography, it says Ben loves that all 5 of his children have worked with him at the nursery. Congratulations on that.
Yeah, that's been fun. Well, it's a family business, so it's a little bit mandatory at times. I mean, when it snows in Oregon and we got to clean greenhouses, everyone's working. But no, we it's been great. All of my kids have grown up here doing different things, from hands-on working with the plants to learning about marketing and all of the things that go with that. And it's been good. It's been very fulfilling and challenging at times.
Tell us a little bit about St. Paul, Oregon. What USDA zone is it? What is your weather like?
Yeah, so St. Paul, Oregon is south of Portland, about 30 minutes down in the Willamette Valley. We have really, really good soils. We're right on the Willamette River, so we have very good water access. And a unique thing about Oregon is it's got really 4 distinct seasons. So we do have very rainy, wet, cold winters, a long, dry summer. And most people don't know that about Oregon, but we do have a very long, dry summer. And so our access to water on the river here is really important. We're zone 8, and so roses just flourish and do great here. One unique thing, too, is we grow all of our roses in containers, and we really try. Almost all of our roses that you're going to buy from us have gone through a full dormant cycle and a winter. And I think when that is the case, you're getting something that's really hardened off, meaning that it's gone through a full cycle of going dormant, and it's going to do well and establish well in your garden.
So obviously you're propagating roses, and these roses are are growing on their own root systems, as opposed to what you might find in a big box store, and you only see them there probably in late winter. Are roses wrapped tightly in plastic, but they're pretty big and they have pretty thick branches, but they're all grafted. Now, I think grafting, we've come to accept grafting as roses as standard, but really it doesn't have to be. But the reason a lot of roses are grafted is because there are root systems out there that can make a rose grow a lot quicker and look a lot prettier if you're on display in a store.
That's correct. The grafting of roses has really been the mechanization of the farming practices to grow roses quickly and move them into retail and have a big plant on display. But it hasn't always been done that way. I mean, all roses will grow on their own roots. That's from the way a rose is hybridized and first established. They've been grown on their own roots, meaning that the top of the plant is the same as the bottom of the plant. We grow them from cuttings. And so there's no grafting. It takes a little longer. It can be challenging at times, but I think the benefit there to the person putting these into their yard is they have a very well-established plant that's going to be extremely hardy and do well in all climates.
And on the other hand, if you purchase grafted roses, that graft point can be a weak spot that might invite disease or decay. Frankly, it could be sending up shoots of a rose variety you don't want if you don't pay attention to it.
Yeah, we see this all the time. Certainly early spring here in Oregon when roses are really starting to grow and push hard. You'll see a rose that might have white blooms and you go, oh, there's some red blooms in there with it. And they look very different. And that's the rootstock. The rootstocks typically on grafted roses are very aggressive growers. And over time, that aggressive growing rootstock will take over the rest of the plant. It's bound to happen. It's just the nature of an aggressive growing rootstock like that. And also you kind of get a lopsided plant over time too. When you graft on, there's no regeneration from the roots with basal break and things. With an own root rose, you're going to get canes coming up from the roots that are the same as the rest of the plant. And you get a better shaped plant that's just more robust and healthy.
Explain for people who don't know that might be confused, because if you hang out with a Rosarian long enough, you'll hear about, I can't take cuttings from that because it's a patented rose. But I was surprised to learn that patents for plants have a limited lifespan. They're only 20 years long.
Yes, that's true. It's important to have a patenting process. The hybridizers put a lot of time and effort into a plant. Sometimes they'll put out 300,000 seedlings to get just one really good rose. And there's a lot of time and effort that goes into that. And as a grower, we want to honor that. So we pay royalties to some of our, to hybridizers. And then some of those are patented, and those patents do last for 20 years. Now, as a grower, we can't profit off of someone else's patent. Now, if you have roses in your garden and you want to take a cutting and give it to someone else and you're not profiting from it, it's just a goodwill gesture, that's acceptable and fine. But it's the commercialization of a patented rose that can become a problem. And we certainly honor all of those patents and royalties. And we really like the hybridizers we work with. They give us great genetics, and it's a beautiful thing they come up with. But
still, of your 900 roses, I would think the vast majority of them are very old roses.
They are. We have a lot of roses. Well, certainly, are in our name, where we started with old garden roses back to the 1800s. And those are great varieties, a great story to tell with them. and they're really a unique part of your garden. I think everyone should have some old garden roses, like your Cecil Brunner. I say it wrong. It's stuck in my head that way. There are also new varieties that are coming out all the time, and colors, new styles, and certainly a lot of the stuff that's coming. I especially like Cortez roses. I think that they're bred for disease resistance and hardiness, and a really nice shaped plant with good fragrance. They do very well. So, those new varieties are also great. You can have it both ways with roses.
As people peruse your online catalog at heirloomroses.com, they may come across a variety like Just Joey that has an R next to its name with a circle. And just for people who don't know, that's not a patent, that's a trademark registration.
That's correct. So that name is a registered trademark name that's given by the breeder. We honor that on our website and make sure that's very well known, so that, with Just Joey, across different places where you might see it, it's the same plant.
Trademark registrations can last a lot longer than a patent too.
That's correct.
As long as you remember to re-register it every now and then.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned that you grow plants in containers, so we're going to talk a little bit about how to grow plants in containers, but talk a little bit first about when that plant arrives at your customer's house. Like I said, I was a little shocked to see no leaves. I figured it was the heat wave that was going on, but there were no leaves in the box. What was impressive about the plant when it arrived in a 1-gallon container was the root system of that plant. I was showing that picture around to my Rosarian friends, and they're all saying, hey, that's a really good root system.
Yeah, you really, the what you're buying when you're buying a young plant like that, and typically our plants are about 16 months old when they leave our nursery, is a fully developed root system that has got a lot of really fine roots there that are very healthy and will take off and really establish well. And so when you pop that container off, you'll see roots all the way around the outside. They're a nice white color. They're really healthy, and they shouldn't be spiraled around a pot. We don't let that happen here. They're going to be very aggressively growing then and establishing so that the top of the plant can just take off and grow. We do defoliate our plants. We know that plant is going to do much better in a box if we actually take the leaves off the plant. And for a short period of time, that rose actually kind of goes, it settles in and it doesn't lose moisture that way, and will do better. Now, as soon as you get it out of the box, take it out of the plastic and give it a drink of water and then get it planted into the ground or into your large container, that plant is going to take off. You're going to see new leaves within a couple weeks, and it's really going to start growing very vigorously. So we've had very good success with that, and we think that's probably the best way to ship plants. For people on the East Coast, I tell them, our roses, I tell my team, they've got to go upside down in a box for 7 days. If they're going to go to the upper Northeast from Oregon, that's going to take that amount of time. By defoliating them and prepping them in a certain way that we do, they'll handle that in a box and be ready to go in their yard as soon as they reach it.
Yeah, I got to say that when old Cecil arrived here and didn't have any leaves, all I had to do was basically follow the instructions on the box it came in, and within 2 weeks, voila, leaves.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of fun, too. I mean, one of the things I like about growing any type of plants is I love to just see new growth. I get excited about new blooms, but like this morning I was out and walking through my yard, and I saw there was some roses I had in containers. I had basil break coming up, and I'm almost more excited to see that as I am blooms. So it's fun to see a plant come alive and start to grow and branch out, buds and all of that.
And that's the good news when you're growing a root on its own system. If there's basil break happening at the ground level, you're going to get the same rose.
That's right. That's a sign of a really healthy plant.
You mentioned fertilizers. Let's talk a little bit about the best fertilizer for a containered rose. Now, the one thing I did do when the day it arrived, I put it in a much larger pot, about 2 feet wide, 2 feet tall, and used a good potting mix. But what sort of potting mix do you like to use for roses?
Yeah, I like to use a bagged potting mix is fine. I try to stay away from something with too much granular fertilizer in it. Sometimes those can get a little hot. A lot of times that granular fertilizer that's in a potting mix will release with heat. And so if it gets really hot, you can get a good dose of nitrogen to a young plant that's not the best for it. So a good potting mix is great. And then liquid fertilizer is what we always recommend for a first-year plant.
Yeah, I love the smell of fish emulsion in the morning, so that's my go-to fertilizer, which has a NPK content, usually a 511, which is a low dosage, but that's all the plant needs.
Yeah, and what's nice about it is you can water with that clear into the fall and make sure your plant is healthy that whole time and it likes that liquid feed, it gets established. Certainly with a fish emulsion like that too, it also feeds the mycorrhiza in the soil and creates an all-around better environment for the plant.
Definitely. Talk about the roses that you're sending out in the summertime. Where do you recommend people put them if they live in a hot climate after they get them?
The best place to put a rose after you get it is either into the ground or in a large container. I tell people to get them planted right away. The soil temperatures are going to be much cooler than they'll get in a small pot. They're less likely to dry out. So they just need some more soil mass around them, and plant them right away. That might be different if you're getting a rose and it's still freezing outside. You might want to care for it a little differently, but certainly in the summertime, the best thing you do is get it in the ground and get a regular watering cycle on it and get it established. It will do much better.
So even though that location may be in full sun, if you're in a hot climate, go ahead and do that, but maybe top your soil with some mulch to let the moisture in the soil last a little bit longer and stay a little bit cooler.
Yeah, and keep an eye. A rose will tell you when it needs watered. If you start to see a little bit of wilt, that's the rose telling you it's time to water. And you can get on a good cycle with that, and those roses will do well. Like I said, in Oregon here, it's hot. Like we're having upper 90-degree days, and they're in a greenhouse with the sides open and things, but it can be up to 100 degrees in there. So the plants you're getting from us right now are accustomed to hot days, and they'll do fine. They just need some good water, like you said, and certainly any kind of mulch you can put around the plant to really retain that water in the soil is good.
Right. All right. So if we're planting in containers, give us some guidelines about planting roses in containers. One thing I really liked, because it was a healthy root system and it wasn't going round and round the soil ball, I didn't have to do any scoring of the root ball to free up any roots, and was able to just plop it into the container around the soil.
First thing, you planted it in the correct size container. The rose will need a pretty good size container to really establish itself and be happy. And so 2x2 is great. That's a great size for a container. Could be a little smaller than that, but that's a great size. Like you said, our roots are really healthy and vigorous, and they're going to be able to just drop right into the soil. I tell people to plant our roses similar to like planting a tomato, and I plant them a little bit deep. And what that does is it promotes more basal break and really gets the basal, the canes from the roots coming up, and it's just settles it in and is good and healthy for that plant. One thing I would say about containers is the number one mistake I see people making is they don't have drainage holes in their containers. And so you want a container that will let the water out the bottom and the roots aren't sitting in a puddle all the time. That can really be hard on a rose to have its feet wet. And so if you get a container, and I like containers from Costco, but I'll tell you, they don't have drain holes in the bottom. You can take a drill and something and put a couple holes in the bottom to make sure that water can get out of there okay.
What size drill bit would you use for that?
Oh, like a half an inch or so. It doesn't take much.
What I like to do, too, is to raise the pot up, or maybe the pot might have some legs, just so there's no contact between the pot and the ground, because those drain holes can easily just serve as a freeway for the roots to just basically anchor themselves in the existing soil. But when it does that, it blocks the drain holes.
Yeah, that's really a good point. One thing my wife has been doing here, we have some pots on our deck and a couple different places on some concrete, and she's been putting them on these little trolley pieces so we can wheel them around a little bit and move them around, and that works well too. It gets them up off the ground, and then we kind of push them back against the house for wintertime. It works great.
Yeah, just make sure that if you buy a base like that on wheels, that the weight requirement. You don't want to overdo the weight on that 3-wheeled or 4-wheeled system, because they could easily collapse on you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good thinking.
I had that happen to me doing a TV spot on HGTV a few years ago, where I was demonstrating planting a citrus tree in a half barrel, and I had a half barrel on this trolley system that the crew had purchased, and I finished planting it and basically said something along the lines of, and see how easy it is to move, and I moved it like 4 inches and the whole thing collapsed. So that never made it to air, though.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're going to use a half barrel for roses, and certainly that's not a bad thing to do, you might want to use a furniture dolly.
Yeah.
All right. I know that you're no fan of granular fertilizer. Tell us why you want the roses, especially the roses from Heirloom Roses, to be fed with a liquid fertilizer and not a granular fertilizer.
It's not that I'm opposed to granular fertilizer. It has its place. But all too often people use granular fertilizer on young plants or in containers. And fertilizer, in essence, is essentially a type of salt. And so that can build up and create toxicity. So too much of a good thing is not a good thing, right? Oh, yeah. And so when you use liquid fertilizer, it's going to leach through the soil. It's typically the ratios, the nitrogen levels in liquid fertilizer are much lower. Like we talked about with the fish fertilizer, it's a lower dosage, but more often. And so it's a much more forgiving way to work with that plant. And you're not going to burn the root system. Like I said, our roots are really nice roots, and too much fertilizer on them from a granular perspective can burn them and really cause harm to the plant. So we always say first year, liquid fertilizer only. And then anytime you're planting in containers, it's best to use liquid fertilizer for any type of plant. You don't want that salt to build up in there and create a toxic environment that is really hard to overcome.
Exactly, and especially with the temperature fluctuations in a containerized plant, that granular fertilizer just might work against your best wishes.
That's right. I've planted in landscapings that I've done and things. I've got a little carried away and put on too much granular, and I've really destroyed whole beds of plants accidentally with just too much granular fertilizer. So just be careful with it. Always read the instructions. Follow the instructions carefully and keep a close eye on it. I've
noticed, and you've probably noticed too, that if you deal with rosarians, and there's a few rose societies around here, and they have some interesting arguments. And it seems like everybody has a different method for pruning a rose. But I've come to the conclusion after all these years of listening to pros and cons of every way to prune a rose that roses are the most forgiving plant in nature. No matter what you do to them, they'll bounce back.
That's right. You know, it's great that we have these arguments, but the most important thing is you prune your rose. Roses, when you prune a rose, it stimulates it to grow. Now, how it grows after that can depend on how you prune it. That's very much true. And so certain people have different ways to do that. But what I always encourage people is to don't be afraid to prune. You really need that to stimulate new growth. You'll have a much better looking plant. And whatever style you use in pruning, that's fine. That's up to you. And you can experiment with that, find what works for you. But don't be afraid to prune. It's really important for that plant to reach its full potential over time and really take a nice shape. And then certainly, I think there's a lot to be said about pruning climbing roses. A lot of people have blooms at the top, and the way you shape and train a climbing rose really dictates how much bloom you get and how really you can get a wall of color that way.
Yeah, that's a whole episode in itself on techniques for pruning climbing roses. But generally speaking, they require some sort of trellis or support that you can sort of wind the canes through.
Yes. Yeah, maybe another time we can discuss that. It's an art, and it's a lot of fun to see the results.
Yes. Maybe you have a video of one at heirloomroses.com.
I do. And maybe you can drop that in the show notes if you want.
I will.
It's helpful, and I think good for people to see. And interesting, too. If you don't know much about training climbing roses, you'll learn something.
Exactly. There's a lot to learn when you go to heirloomroses.com, all sorts of videos to help you out there. Again, they have over 900 varieties of roses to choose from. And the biggest shock you're going to find is when it arrives, it's going to be a small plant with no leaves, but a healthy root system. And folks, that's okay. We've been so inculcated to seeing roses at big box stores in late winter and early spring that are tightly wrapped in plastic, but fairly good size, 1/2-inch, 1-inch canes that, and they may have been waxed too. It's just like a disaster. There's a lot to overcome when you buy a rose that's tightly wrapped in plastic.
Yeah. If people, on the front page of our website, we have a video, and I tell people what to expect. So if you're wondering what you would expect, you can watch that video on our website. It'll tell you everything you need to know about how our roses will arrive and what our standards are. And we stick tightly to those so you always get a healthy plant.
We've been talking with Ben Hanna. He is the owner, proprietor, and chief farmer. They're at heirloomroses.com in Oregon. Check out their website, especially for roses that you're having a hard time finding. And what's nice, too, with buying roses from a reputable firm like Ben's on the internet, the roses are in stock, as opposed to if you go to the local big box store, you're not going to find roses this time of year, that's for sure, in summer. So it's year-round, and that just keeps you busy year-round, I would think.
It does. And, actually, I will say one thing. Fall is one of the best times to plant roses. We say October is a great time. You get the plants in the ground. It's still warm enough to get established, and they're going to pop to life in the spring.
So actually, people could, at heirloomroses.com, if they go there and buy a rose, they could have shipping instructions that say, please ship in October.
Yeah, you can pick your ship date, and we'll ship it to you when you want, and when your optimal time for planting is, and you're off and going.
They're all on their own root system, the roses at heirloomroses.com. Ben Hanna has been our guest. Ben, thanks for all the good info about roses.
Hey, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
I've told you about Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planters. They're sold worldwide. Smart Pots are proudly made 100% right here in the USA. They're BPA-free and lead-free, making them safe for growing vegetables and other edibles. Well, the folks at Smart Pots have added a new product to their lineup, perfect for building the healthiest soil imaginable for your garden by composting. It's the Smart Pot Compost Sack, a large 100-gallon fabric bag that's lightweight yet extremely durable and lasts for years. It can hold 12 cubic feet of pure compost. This rugged fabric is entirely porous, containing many micropores that allow for air circulation and drainage. It's easy to start a compost pile with the Smart Pot Compost Sack. Just open the sack, set it on level ground, and start adding your compostable materials, grass clippings, vegetable peelings, coffee grounds, and more, as well as fallen leaves, straw, and shredded paper. Next, place the optional cover over the sack. That's all there is to it. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers and select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. You can find the location nearest you at their website, and you can buy it online from Smart Pots. Just visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part, because on that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED, F-R-E-D. Do it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pot's lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers and their new compost sack. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics Podcast. There's a lot of ways you can get your questions in. You can submit them through our website, gardenbasics.net. You can speak into your telephone. We have a number. You can call us at 916-292-8964, 916-292-8964. And there's speakpipe.com/gardenbasics, where you can just yell at your computer and it magically gets to me, and we can then answer your question that way. That's speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. Today's question comes in from gardenbasics.net. It is from Dorothea in Fremont, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area on the warmer East Bay side of the bay. And she writes in with a problem with her roses. And she says, I'm hoping you can give me some guidance. A friend passed away, and the new owners of her house had their gardener dig up all the mature roses last weekend and gave them to me. I specifically told them that it was better to do it in the winter, but they didn't listen, and of course chose one of the hottest weekends so far of the year to dig them up. Gardeners did not do a good job of maintaining much root structure when they dug the roses out, so I know I have an uphill battle saving them with so few remaining roots. The roses were watered 2 days in a row on Thursday and Friday before they were dug up on the weekend, so I hope that helped them a little before all the trauma. I soaked the bushes in seaweed kelp extract in a bucket for at least 12 hours after they were dug up, and then potted them. I have been keeping the soil moist with almost daily midday water showers to try to maintain moisture in the remaining leaves and stems. I also watered in some diluted root growth fluid. Unfortunately, one of the tree roses came completely cut off with no roots. I have had it soaking in the seaweed kelp extract since last Saturday and added in some root growth fluid into the soaking container on Tuesday. Any advice on what else we can do to save this rose, even if it's not in tree rose form? Well, let's ask a Rosarian, a master Rosarian. Debbie Arrington of Sacramento Digs Gardening Newsletter is also a past president of the Sacramento Rose Society and one of their regional writers. She is their district. You tell them, Debbie. What do you write about?
I'm an editor for our district newsletter, The Criterion, and our district is Northern California, Nevada, and Hawaii, and Southern Oregon. It's NCNH. Plus, we added Southern Oregon. We haven't added the letter into the acronym, but anyway. So I'm in charge of our newsletter for all the different rose societies that are in that 4-state area, and I also are in charge of our Roses in Review project, which is the annual project by the American Rose Society to have rosarians and rose growers and just the general public rate new roses. And there's a list of more than 250 new rose varieties that have been introduced in the last 5 years, plus some other roses that for whatever reason did not get rated or need to be re-rated. We have until September 26th to fill out the form on the ars.org website to rate those roses. It's one of the oldest continuing citizen science projects in the U.S. We're close to celebrating 100 years. This is number 98 of this project. And I'm in charge of trying to get people to do it in 4 states.
All right. So now you're in charge of giving Dorothea some advice on how to save that rose.
Her poor roses. Well, her instincts were entirely right. The easiest time to move a rose is when it's dormant, which is in the winter after it's lost its foliage. Now, considering that she's in the Bay Area, quite often those roses never actually go fully dormant. They always have some growth going on because it doesn't get cold enough. The thing about moving a rose, it's like any large plant. It's going to have as much root down below ground as the plant's branches are above ground. So if you've got a plant that's 4 to 5 feet tall, it's probably got roots going down 4 to 5 feet too. And that's why a rose is so drought tolerant and able to get through periods of low water, is because it has such deep, far-reaching roots. And the roots on a rose plant are sort of like the way the canes are above ground. They're shaped sort of like a hand with 5 up-reaching fingers. So below ground, it's just the opposite. With usually there's 3 to 5 main thick roots. And with mature rose plants like that, those roots are going to be thicker than your thumb. They're pretty big roots. And then they have all the little hair roots around it, which are the little feeder roots that actually pick up the water. Now, the thing about that poor tree rose is they chopped it off at the bottom of the trunk, and it looks like it doesn't have 6 inches of root underneath it. And tree roses are very tricky in that they're double grafts. And so the way they survive at all is a miracle. It's one of those weird gardening things that somebody came up with how to do it a couple 100 years ago, and they've been doing it ever since. There's a graft that's just above ground at the base. And on the actual rootstock down below is almost always Dr. Huey, which is this very fast-growing, single-blooming red rose that you see it in March or April because it only blooms in early spring. But it's almost thornless, which is why they like to use it for grafting. And it grows very fast. And it's very strong and hardy and really able to put out big, thick, strong roots. So that's why they use it for the rootstock. The middle part of that rose and the tree rose, that is rose stock that's grown for its ability to create a trunk. Roses are related to plums and apples and lots of other trees. And so there are varieties that come up with very woody kind of trunk material. And that's what they're using for that middle part of the tree rose. And then on top of that is another graft, and that graft is where you have the variety of the rose that you want it to be. Like if it's an iceberg or a Julia Child, or it's quite often a Floribunda rose, because they want something that's going to have a lot of flowers and big sprays. That's why you're growing a tree rose, is that you want it to be kind of like a lollipop bouquet where you have this stick with all sorts of flowers up on top of it. So there's another graft up above where it has all this stuff. Now, the way to possibly save that tree rose, and not as a tree rose, but as a rose plant, is to try to get that top graft to root. because it's going to be very, very hard to try to grow roots on the bottom of that trunk because they basically destroyed the bottom graft. But it is possible to try to get the top graft to root.
It was a good thing then that Dorothea, she sent pictures of this suffering tree rose, is she left the entire top part. And I'm thinking if you're trying to save a tree rose, or any rose for that matter, that's been dug out in the summertime, I would trim back the top as much as possible.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But
that's another thing I would recommend is go ahead and take cuttings.
Yeah.
Take some cuttings and try to grow a new plant off the cutting in remembrance of her friend. Because I think the plant has more sentimental value than, what the plant is probably actually worth at this point. If she could grow some new bush out of the cutting from the top, it would be as good for her as that plant before.
I think she is aware of that since her very last sentence says, any advice on what else I can do to save the rose, even if it's not in tree rose form?
Yes.
And there you go, cuttings.
Yes, to do cuttings. And actually, cuttings root pretty well during the summer. It's best to take a cutting that has a flower at the end of it because it has some of the hormones in it that will help it go ahead and root. So they recommend that you take cuttings that have flowered. And so, rose in a vase, shoot, that's a cutting right away. And to make sure it has several of the 5-leaf leaflets. And if you're planting a cutting, you need to have at least 2 nodes. That's where the leaf is attached to the stem below the soil line, and at least 2 above the soil line.
So it sounds like this cutting should be about the dimensions of a standard pencil.
Yes.
All right, because you'll have probably 5 or 6 nodes on that.
Yes.
I would think.
And most of Floribundas, their nodes are 2 to 3 inches apart.
Okay. And 2 of those have to be underground. And what is the best sort of a mix to use to start a cutting?
Something that retains a lot of moisture.
So you'd almost want a seed starting mix?
Yes, seed starting mix works great.
Okay. And probably keep it on the north side of the house?
Yes. North side, yeah. And this time of year I keep them inside.
Yeah.
And they don't need much light. The idea is that to get them to concentrate on their roots. So you need to keep the rooting medium evenly moist. And they really appreciate some rooting hormone.
Well, it sounds like she's been using something along those lines. Seaweed kelp extract, she mentioned she used, does have auxins in it, which can promote root growth. And then she says she added in some root growth fluid into the soaking container, and I'm not sure what root growth fluid is.
Well, the thing is, it might be something, it might have, there's an oak fungus. So it might have some of that in it. What she's doing to the plant right now could promote more of the little tiny feeder roots, but it's not going to be enough to hold up the plant. Because the thing about roots is they not only provide the nutrition and the hydration for the plant, it also, it's their feet, it's their support, it's what holds them upright. And if she tries to put that tree rose in the ground, it's going to be incredibly top heavy.
Trim back the top and then save those cuttings on the top and start sticking them in probably 1 gallon containers with a seed starting mix?
Yes.
Okay, and then
and you can plant several to each pot. How we do it in the Rose Society is we usually take like 8 to 10 cuttings and put it in 1 4-inch pot, and because you're going to get a 50% dieback rate.
Wow.
Under your best circumstances, you're only going to get a 50-50 chance. So and then once they start leafing out and showing that they're growing and taking, then you tease them apart and then separate them into different pots.
8 to 10 in a 4-inch pot sounds like a lot.
Well, yeah, but they're just little guys.
Okay, so this isn't the thickness of a pencil then?
No. They're with thicker ones, you probably put them in a 1 gallon pot. A lot of the ones that I've got, it's mostly I've been working with miniatures, so they are a lot thinner too. So, and with this plant too, with the tree rose, she might be able to try to induce it to grow some roots off that top graft, but that's going to be hard. That would be the other possibility.
Oh, no, that's interesting. Yeah.
Because she might be able to bury that trunk down.
Yeah, so she cut it off somewhere like an inch below the graft, or maybe 2 inches below the graft, and sunk that whole thing into some seed starting mix, that might start the plant anew.
Yeah, it might start some new roots. And I would give more than 2 inches. I would give like probably about 6 inches.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I've always been convinced that the person who invented tree roses is also the person that owns the rebar factory, because you're not going to keep a tree rose upright without rebar.
Oh, true. Yeah. They're too top heavy.
Yeah. It's crazy, but I understand. Yeah. And like Dorothea is trying to do is just keep it alive in memory of her friend. And there are several ideas right there, Debbie. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tell us about Sacramento Digs Gardening.
Sacramento Digs Gardening recently celebrated its 5th anniversary on June 1st. We've been publishing every single day since June 1st, 2018. So we have, a lot of gardening posts, more than 1,600. And that includes recipes every Sunday. And we recently compiled our recipes into cookbooks. We released one for spring, and on July 4th weekend, we released our second cookbook, which is a collection of summer recipes. It's got more than 60 summer recipes, all using the sort of produce that you'll be harvesting from your garden or finding at the farmer's market. And it has at least 15 tomato recipes, if you're looking for tomato recipes right now. We have a lot of information on local garden events and what people are talking about. That's what we do. I'm a award-winning garden writer, and Kathy Morrison is a Sacramento County Master Gardener. And between the two of us, we are very well connected in the gardening community, and we write about what's happening in the Sacramento area gardening. It's actually a 4-county area, the greater Sacramento area. And every Saturday we have a checklist of what to do in the garden that week. And this is not something that we came up with years ago and put in a calendar. This is what's happening for real in our local weather situation and our local soil temperatures and water availability and all that other stuff. So you know what's happening right now.
And it's not all about roses. We should point out the Sacramento Digs Gardening newsletter is many, many gardening topics, not just roses.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, it's I grow hundreds of different kinds of plants. Not just roses. I've got a lot of roses, but, I grow all sorts of things. And same with Kathy. And, we are, plant people. And we like growing plants and all sorts of different kinds of plants. And so we're experienced in lots of different kinds of plants. So not just roses.
Excellent publications. Check it out. Sacramento Digs Gardening. We'll have a link to it in today's show notes, or just do an internet search for Sacramento Digs Gardening and you can find it right there. Master Rosarian, writer extraordinaire, Debbie Arrington, thanks so much for helping Dorothea out.
You're welcome. And tell her good luck.
Good luck, Dorothea. You have a small yard and you think you don't have the room for fruit trees? Well, maybe you better think again, because Dave Wilson Nursery wants to show you how to grow great tasting fruits like peaches, apples, pluots, and nut trees. Plus, they have potted fruits such as blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, boysenberries, figs, grapes, hops, kiwi, olives, and pomegranates. These are all plants that you can grow in small areas. You can even grow many of them in containers on patios as well. It's called backyard orchard culture, and you can get step-by-step information via the Dave Wilson YouTube videos. So where do you find those? Well, just go to davewilson.com, click on the Home Garden tab at the top of the page. Also in that Home Garden tab, you're going to find a link to their fruit and nut harvest chart. You can be picking delicious, healthy fruits from your own yard from May to December here in USDA Zone 9. And something else you're going to find in that Home Garden tab. You're going to find the closest nursery to you that carries Dave Wilson's quality fruit trees, and they're in nurseries from coast to coast. So start the backyard orchard of your dreams at davewilson.com. This week's Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast is going to hit home for anyone who's mistakenly growing the wrong pepper variety. It's a mistake that has plagued gardeners in nearly 24 states this spring and summer. These gardeners purchased what they thought was a jalapeno pepper plant, or perhaps a packet of jalapeno seeds. But what's been growing instead? A different variety pepper, sometimes with way less heat. That alone would be a big enough disappointment. But this seed mix-up also includes mismarked sweet pepper plants that could turn out to be much, much hotter. Now that would be a nasty surprise. Not only for gardeners, but also for shoppers, restaurants, and canneries. So how did this mix-up happen? Well, it turns out those mismarked seeds may have been imported and distributed to commercial growers and nurseries across the United States with the wrong labels on those commercial batches of seeds. Where did they come from? What can a disappointed gardener do about it? It's all in the current Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and mini podcast, Jalapeno-gate. If you're already a Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter subscriber, it's probably in your email waiting for you right now. Or you can start a subscription. It's free. Find the link to the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast in today's show notes or on the Substack app. Or you can sign up at the newsletter link at our homepage, gardenbasics.net.
I'm introducing our guest today. I looked up a bunch of stuff on him. Okay, and he has a bunch of stuff. He started his broadcasting career in 1969 in college radio, Fort Bragg, Stockton. Oh, I got a good voice. I don't need it.
Oh, yes, you do for this. This is for the podcast.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All right. 1969, Fort Bragg. Now you're really making me nervous.
Let me explain that. I was in college in 69 in Southern California at Cal State Northridge, and then wanted to be in radio, and I drove up Highway 101 looking for radio towers and left a tape and a resume at every radio station I found. And I went from Los Angeles up Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, up the coast to San Jose, to San Francisco, up to Eureka, over to Redding, over to Chester, I think, and then came back down I-5 and stopped at all the radio stations on the way back. And when I got home, there was a phone message. Well, they didn't have phone mail back then, but my dad said, "Hey, some station in Fort Bragg called you. They figure if you're going to drive up here, you'll probably want the job." And so I did.
Okay, so Fort Bragg, Stockton, and Modesto. He became a Sacramento radio regular in 1975. He debuted in 1982 on a country station.
Well, close. It was 1977. Farmer Fred, though, started in 1982. I became a master gardener in 1982, and there was a farm show on KRAK. Anybody here remember KRAK, a country music station? Thank you. Well, early in the morning at 5 a.m., Walt Shaw had a farm show. And I said, "Hey, Walt, can I have 5 minutes of that show to do garden tips? I'll call myself Farmer Fred." And that's how it began.
Yep. Okay, and then he earned his UC Cooperative Extension Master Gardener certification in 1982. 1983, he debuted 2-hour weekly garden show at 10 a.m. on Fridays as Farmer Fred. Yeah. November 1st, 1992, he had a talk 650 KSTE. Mm-hmm. Okay, first signed on the air with Hoffman as one of its original employees. Through several ownerships changes, he stuck, yet growing. His weekly KSTE show has been on that station for 28 years.
29 years, it turned out to be.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And then he eventually picked up hosting the KFBK Garden Show. For almost 20 years, Hoffman broadcast the 2 live shows back to back.
That's true, yeah.
Chatting with guests and listeners.
I didn't have a Sunday off for 29 years.
29 years, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so to quote Farmer Fred, "I don't even think of you as a listener. We are a gardening community. We are friends and neighbors who are bound together by our love of soil, plants, and the outdoors. It's been wonderful to chat with all you peppers and perennials instead of politics and pandemics. All of us need a regular break from that, and I'm glad I could have the respite for you and me." Farmer Fred.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the Four Seasons Garden Club. I was told there'd be about 20 people here. I think there's more like 30 people here, so wonderful. The tables are filled. Well, how many of you have a garden? Good. That's why you're here. Well, it's air conditioned too. I could see why you'd be here in the heat for the air conditioning. But yeah, gardening is something that lasts a lifetime. And I think it's the only area where as you get older, you don't lose the respect of your children because you know more than they do about gardening if they would only listen to you. But the point is, that's a great thing about gardening is the older you get, the more wisdom you have. And wisdom is just getting knocked in the head so many times you figure out, okay, I won't do that anymore. And then you do it right. But there are some basic tips for success for gardening that everybody can participate in. And we'll have this as a handout at the end. And there is a note on the back of this that mentions the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. Anybody here listen to the podcast? Thank you so much. There are directions here on how to get to the podcast by going to my website, gardenbasics.net, and you can listen to the podcast right there. So the podcasting is just broadcasting without the bra. I started the podcast in April of 2020, just as COVID broke out. And I was talking to my friends in the gardening business, especially the seed companies. And they were telling me, Fred, we're getting slammed. We're out of seeds already, and it's just March. And I figured, there's a lot of new gardeners out there who are stuck at home and they want to do something. Maybe we can provide some guidance. And it's been around ever since. All right. I did a little experiment last Saturday when the daytime temperature was 100 degrees. And I was wondering, well, just how hot are these containerized plants getting that I have that have roses in them? And they're in different kinds of containers. So I got out my soil thermometer. I stuck it in my Smart Pot. Smart Pot is a fabric pot that is black in color. Actually, they come in several colors now, but the Smart Pot comes in various sizes too. So you can get them in 1 gallon, 5 gallon, 15, 30 gallon, or bigger containers. But it just has excellent airflow through it. And plants don't get root bound in it. It's really a very nice fabric planter to have. The rose in the Smart Pot, now remember, this was a 100-degree day. The soil in that pot was 80 degrees. Perfect. That's what a plant loves. A plant that is in soil temperatures between 80 and 90 degrees, it's going to thrive. It's going to grow like crazy. Then I went to another rose that was in not a fabric pot, but a corrugated pot. It's sort of a cardboard pot. If you shop at nurseries, you might find roses sold in those or some berry plants in these corrugated pots. That temperature was closer to 90, 95 degrees. So I think, okay, well, that's okay, but maybe I'll just move this where it's going to get a little bit more shade. Finally, I went to a rose that I had planted in a black plastic pot. It's a 100-degree day. The temperature of that soil, 110. It could get up to 130 if I left it there long enough, because as the heat builds, that soil temperature goes up. Root damage to plants in black plastic pots will start to happen when that temperature hits 104 degrees. And it gets worse as it goes up. You could even get damage at 100 degrees if it was in a full sun situation where you're going to have nothing but sun hitting it all day long. The shorter the duration, the better. But the fact of the matter is, if you have plants, and I bet you do, somewhere in your yard, you have a plant in a black plastic pot. We all do. Who doesn't have a stack of black plastic pots somewhere stashed in the yard somewhere? If you have plants in black plastic pots, take some precautions for it, especially if it's in full sun and you want to keep the plant. Because when those roots go, plant's going to die. And what most people, when they see death on the top of a plant, they don't think about the roots. They think about the leaves. Oh, man, I'll give it some water. I'll give it some fertilizer. Water's a good idea. Fertilizer, not a good idea for a plant that's under stress. You don't want to try to promote new growth in a plant that's under stress like that and is having to try to rebuild its root system. So what do? I'd put everything in Smart Pots myself, and that's what I did. Now, but I ran out of Smart Pots, so I moved the one rose that was in the black plastic pot around the corner to the shady side of the house, just to give it a chance, along with a good drink of water. And I'm hoping that I caught it in time. We'll find out. The plant already started getting very interesting looking discolorations on the leaves. And I knew that wasn't a disease or an insect. It was the soil temperature of that pot. So a soil thermometer is actually a good investment. You can find that at any good nursery. And just during the heat of the day, stick it in your pots. See what the soil temperature is. If that soil temperature is hitting over 100 degrees on midday, late afternoon especially, either move the pot to a shadier area, or ideally get a better pot, or put that black plastic pot in an even bigger pot. Maybe you have an old terracotta pot or something that is of a bigger dimension. Slip that black plastic pot inside that bigger container, fill in the sides with mulch, something to act as a buffer to even bring the temperature down even more. And besides, it looks better. Now, the only warning I'd have if you do that is make sure that bigger pot has drain holes. Otherwise, that plant is just sitting in water. The other thing to know when you are having problems with your soil is when you water. Pay attention. Now, if you water your containers by hand, okay, put the hose over the plant, watch the bottom of the pot. When does the water come out of the bottom of the pot? If it's after, 30 seconds or so of watering, you're probably fine. If the water is coming out immediately, that means that soil ball has compacted itself, pulled away from the sides of the pot, and that water is just running down the side, and it's not watering the roots of your plant. So if you see water coming out immediately, you've got a problem. One way to solve that problem would be to add more soil around the sides of that pot and put it in a shadier location or in a bigger pot. But what do you do if you can't move that plant and you don't have any extra pots? If it is a dark-colored pot, you could paint it a lighter color. Debbie Flower, a retired college horticulture professor who's on the podcast a lot, likes to wrap her black plastic pots in aluminum foil, which I always thought, well, that's a good way to signal the UFO to land in your yard, I guess. But it does reflect the light and heat away from that pot. So as a temporary measure, that's not a bad idea. And if you're watering that container plant and you're watering it and you're watering it and the water hasn't come out yet, you got a bigger problem. Your drain holes are clogged, probably from soil that has mixed from the pot with the ground, and it's in touch with the ground. And so roots have gone out those drain holes and are anchored in your soil, plugging those drain holes. Plants need air to breathe. The roots need air. One of the biggest components of soil, oddly enough, is air. Air and rocks comprise most soils. It's only like 2-3% of what you might think of as soil, as compost, as organic matter. So really, soil is very basic for maintaining air spaces, to allow the water to flow through, and for the roots to breathe. So again, if that plant is not draining, what you want to do, get it out of that pot, clear those holes, and then raise the pot off the ground. Give yourself an airspace of maybe an inch or so if that pot is resting on the ground. Put it on bricks, put it on boards, something where you have space. That way, when the roots try to go down through the drain holes and into the soil, and they find no soil, they'll stop. Which is the beauty of smart pots, by the way, because of all the, like a million little porous holes on the sides of a smart pot fabric container. All those little air holes stop the roots from coming out. But they don't go round and round and round. That's the other thing roots will do in a plastic pot, is you just go round and round and round around the sides and around the bottom. They won't do that in a fabric pot. Yes?
How long do they last?
I know people have used them for 20 years. I've got some that are 7 years old that I still use on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah, they do last a long time. They work, and they'll keep your plant healthy. All right, but get a soil test done and know what you have. It's amazing how soils can vary in your own yard. I did two soil tests on our property, one in the front yard, one in the backyard. They were widely different as far as the nutrients they had and the pH level. Soil tests, you can buy small soil tests for testing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium and pH at any nursery or hardware store if you want a more thorough test. University of Massachusetts Amherst, Colorado State University, and Texas A&M, you mail them off your soil sample, they send back a complete soil report, and it's under $20. And that's a very reasonable fee for paying for a soil test. Well, here we go. You can tell your soil moisture with a moisture meter. These are inexpensive. The little green one here sells for about $9 or $10. This is my favorite. I've had this for 30 years, and it's sold originally for $85 or so. I think it's up to $100 or so. But if you take care of it, if you clean them, you don't leave them in the soil, you take them back, put them in the shed, it'll last a lifetime. That over there is a soil probe. It looks like the letter T. It's usually made out of chrome. And it has a big opening along the side of the pipe here. So what you do is you plunge it into the soil, you give it a quarter turn, you lift it out, and you can see the soil, you can touch the soil, and you can determine from that how wet the soil is at the root zone, 8 inches down. It's very inexpensive. You don't need batteries for that. And that will last you a lifetime. It's usually a very sturdy item called a soil probe. All right. TheGardenBasics.net is where you can find the podcast. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody have questions? Yes.
I noticed some of the leaves on some of my crepe myrtle trees have a sticky, clear kind of coating on them just recently. Yeah. What is that?
It has a euphemistic name. It's called honeydew. What that is aphid poop, basically. And you got aphids on your crepe myrtle tree or scale, and their secretions are this sticky substance that ants love. If you look really closely, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if you're seeing ants going up and down that tree, and they're harvesting that honeydew to take back to the queen in the nest. And in the meantime, what they're doing as well is moving the aphids around to other parts of the plant in order to harvest more honeydew. The ants are the ranchers, and the aphids are their cattle. And when you have that sticky stuff, and don't park under a crepe myrtle tree in the summertime. Otherwise, you're going to have to clean your windshield with something like vegetable oil will work. But yeah, that's how you get that sticky stuff off your hands, too, is take some vegetable oil and rub it in your fingers. But that is the secretions of aphids.
So what should you do?
Good question. How do you control aphids? The easiest way to control aphids is a blast of water on the underside of the leaves, and that's good with a crepe myrtle. You're going to get wet, so dress appropriately. But using a jet spray on your hose, just spray all the underside of the leaves. Do that maybe twice a week for about 2 or 3 weeks, and that'll control the aphid population. Once they fall off the plant, they don't go back up. Well, thanks for coming out. I appreciate it. I don't want to keep you from lunch. It's coming Saturday, August 5th. It's Harvest Day at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. It's put on by the UC Master Gardeners of Sacramento County. And Harvest Day features speakers, education tables, garden vendors, food trucks, and your chance to explore the beautiful 1-acre garden that is designed for you, the backyard gardener, to take home ideas that you can use in your own yard. The Fair Oaks Horticulture Center was built and is maintained by Sacramento County Master Gardeners. It features areas dedicated to growing berries, herbs, fruit trees, vegetables, a vineyard, native plants, water-efficient plants, and a lot more. Plus, there are sections dedicated to composting, and that includes worm composting. On Harvest Day, each area is staffed by master gardeners who are eager to answer your garden questions. At the dozens of educational tables, you're going to get information from professional nursery people, irrigation specialists, the Audubon Society, soil experts, the master food preservers, local garden clubs, water experts, honeybee, and native bee specialists. Vendors will include Northern California nurseries, exotic plants, cactus and succulents, mushroom growing kits, and more. And the speakers, they're going to be talking about landscape trees, attracting pollinators, and myself and America's favorite retired college horticulture professor, Debbie Flower, will be talking at 8:30 that morning about tips for saving time, money, and water in the garden. Someone once said it's the best garden event in Northern California. Oh, wait, I said that. But it's true. And best of all, it's free. Harvest Day at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center. It's Saturday, August 5th, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. It's in Fair Oaks Park in Sacramento County. Check today's show notes for a link with more details and maps of Harvest Day. Hope to see you there. Today's Garden Basics Flashback episode is a summertime reminder for all gardeners on how to effectively and efficiently water your garden. Proper soil moisture is necessary for healthy plant growth. Do you know how moist your garden soil is right now? What are the easiest and best ways to determine the moisture level of your soil? How do you install a drip irrigation system on a raised garden bed, which might have totally different moisture patterns than your in-ground garden? How do you pick a soil moisture meter or a soil probe? Don't forget that your choice of fertilizers also plays a part in proper irrigation. We cover all that in this week's Flashback episode. It's number 265, Soil Irrigation Basics. It's from last May. Find a link to it in today's show notes, as well as the podcast player of your choice, or look it up at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays. Plus, the newsletter podcast that comes with the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter continues, and that will also be released on Fridays. Both are free, and they're brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net. And that's where you can also sign up for the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast. That's gardenbasics.net, or you can use the links in today's show notes. And thank you so much for listening.